To me, Henry Porter has been a positive godsend to the city of Sarasota and the county and to the state of Florida. But not only that, he's an international person. He's universal in so many ways that he's been able to influence not only locally but nationally and internationally in a positive way.
His attitude and his concern about human beings and his influence on young people has just been absolutely amazing in this community.
Bishop Dr. Henry L. Porter was born in Sarasota, Florida to Hazel and Ernest Porter on January 2nd, 1948. He was the youngest of 3 children, an older brother Ed, 10 years his senior, and sister Joyce, 8 years older.
Born at the midwife's house on 35th Street, then taken home to 29th Street, 1986, 29th Street. And that was my home, still is our home. We still own the properties there. But right here in Sarasota, Florida, and this has been my life.
His family traces their Sarasota roots back to 1919.
My mother was born in 1920 and they brought her in here. My mother worked, and she worked as a maid, a domestic servant out on the beach at the Four Seasons Apartments. And I would go out there and I'd be with Mother, and Mother said, well, Henry, all I require of you is that you finish high school.
Hazel knew from the very beginning her son would be devoted to serving God. When he was very young, she told Henry of her prayer regarding his birth.
My mother always told me, she said, Henry, I want you to understand there's something about you. You have some special things. She said, well, you know, when I was praying, I prayed and I asked God to send me a boy and to send me a holy child.
His father, Ernest, was a quiet man who spoke little, yet when he did, his words rang true. He was a hard-working man, employed at the then Anderson Ford in Sarasota for 25 years. Henry was greatly influenced by him, not just as a father, but as a Sunday school teacher. Ernest was proud of his young son, but he also challenged him.
I had all A's and 1B, and he said, well, son, you got this 1B on your report card. I mean, you can do better than that, can't you? But he had taken the same card down to Anderson Ford Company, and he showed them everything. So I knew what he was doing there, and I said, I'm on to this. So I tried in every way to always make him happy. But the thing he always let me be was myself.
As an adolescent, Henry began to show signs of his musical talent. He wanted an organ, but his parents could not afford the big, beautiful Hammond organ Henry dreamed of. They were able to buy him a smaller Thomas organ, which came with 10 free lessons.
We had this house that sits on cinder blocks. So from the steps, there were 3 steps down from the porch, the front porch. My daddy told me there's a man at the door, answer the door, Henry. I went to the door, and they're unloading this organ. My daddy was standing down at the bottom of the step on the sidewalk. I jumped from the top of the porch into my daddy's arms. Never done that, remember? We men, never done that. I jumped into his arms and kissed my dad, right? I just held him and kissed him, and then I realized after I was in his arms, oh, and I slid down out of the arms. My daddy had this smile on his face like, son, I'm so happy that you let me know how you feel. And that's kind of what opened me up to letting people know how I feel. Because people need to know their love. I was 14 years old, and it was just everything I wanted. I played it all the time, had a stereo inside of it, and my mother sang.
And many of evenings, Henry would have 7, 8 people out until groups started forming around him. And his talent was there. Even as a youngster, his talent was there. The others of us had to go to learn to play the piano to keep up with Henry, who was already there. He was always just innovative. He
was a very good student and developed a fondness for education at a very early age.
I loved kindergarten. It was a Newtown day nursery then, Helen Payne now. And I went, Miss Horn was my teacher, and I was 4 years old. And we used to play, me and Willie Charles Shaw, still a friend of mine, Al Houston, and others. And we were there, 4 years old. We'd go down to Miss Garrett's store and get 2 for a penny cookies, 2 for a penny oat milk cookies, sweet cookies, and ginger snaps. And then I remember going to 1st grade. I remember all of my teachers. Mrs. McGreen was my first teacher. Arabia B. Johnson taught me in 4th grade. She taught me, bless this house, O Lord, we pray. Make it safe by night and day. She taught me, we're having fun in Sarasota. In the sun, in the sand, in the sea.
At that time, school was we had just one school. We didn't have a middle school. It was just Booker. And you went from elementary to Booker High School.
Henry was a superior student, becoming active in many areas. He was student body president.
He was one of the most brilliant students that we had there.
At Booker, he was influenced by many teachers, but none more than his math teacher, Mrs. Jamie Jackson Goodman Poe. She was his homeroom teacher in 8th grade through his senior year.
She became my light, my agent of success. Mrs. Poe took me and gave me books and said, read this, read that. She took me in mathematics and began to show me things. By the time I was in 9th grade, my head, I was learning so much that I started actually assisting sometimes with the grading of the papers. By the time I was in 12th, I had taken every course we offered at Booker.
Even then, he was making an impression on those around him.
He showed the skills and ability of not only of being able to lead young people in groups, but having a tremendous speaking ability, being willing to volunteer to do almost anything, not only in the schools, but in the community and at his church.
Newtown of Sarasota was a close-knit community, providing Henry opportunities to explore his talents.
There were restaurants. There were places teenagers could be. It was a nice place. Men would tip their hats off to the ladies. This is where I was growing up.
The bums on the street were called mischief. We respected everybody, and everybody knew everybody. If you came up the street, people on both sides knew who you were. We were blessed.
While Henry had a loving family and dedicated teachers, life was not without its challenges. These were the days of segregation in the South, and while Henry's parents tried to protect him from the hatred that could exist, he was not immune.
They'd have the white water fountain, black water in color. And so what I did, I went to both of them because I wanted to see what was the difference in the taste of the water. I didn't know. I thought it was some difference in the taste of the water.
At 14 years of age, Henry wrote his first poem. At 17, he was made aware of his gift and musical calling during a dream.
I was lying on the floor, and it sounded like 1,000 coloratura sopranos and lyric sopranos and altos and the best bass, double bass, and they were singing this song, full orchestra, and they were just, I was so amazed. I woke up out of this dream and I could just hear, word of the Lord is within thee, word of the Lord is within thee. It was so wonderful. I jumped up screaming like everybody could hear it with me, but they didn't. So it's like waking up out of a dream. But then what happens on the days when you know you weren't dreaming? You're just there, and the same thing happens. It's like you're living a dream.
Henry graduated as valedictorian from Booker High School in 1965. Once again, Mrs. Poe helped him by introducing him to the Selby Foundation. He became a Selby Scholar, receiving a scholarship to study math at Florida A&M. Henry excelled at Florida A&M. He became the president of Alpha Kappa Mu Honor Society and the Math Club, as well as his fraternity Kappa Alpha Psi. He was the first student director of the Florida A&M Gospel Choir. In 1969, at age 21, he graduated from Florida A&M with honors. One of his teachers, Mrs. Clark, encouraged him to apply for a Ford Foundation scholarship.
She handed me a piece of paper in my senior year and said, Henry, apply for this scholarship. And I looked and I read it and I said, Miss Clark, the deadline is passed, and I passed her back the paper. I said, the deadline is passed. And she looked at me and she said, Henry, they were not talking to you. She said, they're looking for you. I sit on these sort of boards and I've done this for years. And Miss Clark said, you apply. I applied and the Ford Foundation called me on the telephone and said, your application came in late of 6,000. But we noticed it and we wanted to put you among the 600 semifinalists. They interviewed me, and of the 600 semifinalists, they would select 40. And I was one of the 40 selected for the Ford Foundation Doctoral Fellowship. And at that time, I had applied because I wanted to go to Yale or Harvard, Princeton, etc. And all of those schools accepted me. And I chose Yale.
This was the beginning of several new experiences for the young mathematician. However, before he started school in New Haven, Connecticut that fall, he went home for a summer of study. Returning to Sarasota and the Newtown community where he grew up, he discovered his idyllic world was undergoing significant change. Integration was bringing unforeseen challenges to the community.
A lot of the kids were angry because they were forced to go to school, and they boycotted the schools. When they would go to the schools, sometimes spit would be thrown on them or something like that. So there was some anger. Why take us away from a school in our community with bands, where we could participate in football, where you could have campus queens. We had floats, we had parades, other bands came in, we had our own football field, we had our own basketball tournaments, and we would travel, we had our own buses in the community.
Henry knew he had to do something, but what? Then he realized God had given him musical gifts. He would use them to touch lives.
And I found out a song could lift them and make them feel like they could do something again. And all I did was put an announcement in the paper. William Fred Jackson, one of our tremendous leaders of the community, who started the Weekly Bulletin, he took us, put our picture there and said, Henry Porter is starting a group, and everybody interested in being in this concert, come. And they came, and they came. We had rehearsals from one church to the other because the community was one.
On July 20th, 1969, the Community Gospel Choir of Sarasota made its debut. From that core group would become the Westcoast Gospel Chorus of Florida.
That was the only thing I was going to do because I was never returning to Sarasota.
That fall, he followed his dream to Yale. It was a very different culture.
I had never been then to an entirely white faculty, never, or to a classroom where I was in the minority. I'd never been a minority.
Once again, his music was a great influence in his life at Yale.
Guy asked me, said, do you know this guy named Kenneth Mose? I said, no. He said, I'm going to take you down there to him. You remind me so much of him. He was a young guy. Whew. I went there and they were singing music. 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 They were doing so much good music. He took me down to New York. Then he put me on this album and asked me what I sing. And he said, you know, if you would sing such and such, sing that note for me. And I sang. He said, sing this note. I sang. He said, why aren't you singing? You know, because I'm a mathematician, you know.
This was during the height of the civil rights demonstrations. Henry did not participate in the marches, but he was nonetheless impacted by them.
There was the time of the Black Panther trials. Angela Davis. I was out just seeing what was going on. I was over at the Yale campus. I visited some friends at the old Yale campus, Yale College. And while I was there in the college, the police sprayed mace, and look, it blew into the college compound. And what I saw were many angry college students who were aiming in some way to express themselves and the anxieties of prejudice. My dad told me later, he had witnessed hangings. He didn't tell me this until I returned to ministry. But my daddy told me this. He said, Henry, I didn't tell you a number of things because I never wanted you to be prejudiced. I didn't want you to learn how to hate.
Henry did not hate those who seemed so full of hate. He was focused on achieving greater goals. God was calling and soon provided him with another link in his spiritual path when he attended the Trinity Temple Church of God in Christ.
Bishop Brewer asked me that very first day I met him. He said, come home and have dinner with me. Bishop Brewer then took me under his arms and shepherded me. I drove for him. I was his driver every weekend, Sundays.
In between his studies at Yale and ministry there, Henry found himself being pulled back to Sarasota. On October 13, 1969, the West Coast Gospel Chorus of Florida was founded. By December 1969, West Coast flourished and concerts were in demand. Henry became aware of the overwhelming need for his teachings and talents in Sarasota. He gave up his dream of obtaining his mathematics doctorate and returned to Sarasota. The early days of the ministry were conducted on the front porch of the Porter family home.
My front porch was 7 by 15, 7 feet by 15 feet. And we would meet there in the living room. The whole house would be crowded. The neighbors always heard us because we had the organ on the front porch. We'd have our rehearsals, but my neighbors would actually come out and sit in chairs, bring their lawn chairs, etc. And we'd sit. And then you hear them come by and say, "Could you sing 'Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior'?" So, okay. And then, "Could you sing?" You could hear them yelling. I got joy.
In 1971, he developed the Henry L. Porter Evangelistic Association, a non-profit organization. He took the chorus on the road, traveling throughout the United States. In 1973, he and his team of 40 to 50 youth took their first goodwill tours to the western United States. While in the West, his alma mater called and offered him a position teaching mathematics at Florida A&M. At age 25, Henry Porter was one of the youngest members of the faculty. Even while teaching mathematics, he continued to develop his ministry. At Florida A&M, he established the Spiritual Growth and Enlightenment Prayer Groups, which rapidly expanded to the University of Florida, Florida State University, University of South Florida, and New College. Henry continued his music ministry as well. He traveled every week between his ministerial responsibilities in Sarasota and his teaching duties in Tallahassee. In 1975, he gave up teaching at a college level and returned to Sarasota to devote his attention full-time to his ministry.
I was doing almost 1,000 miles or more a weekend trying to get to all the places. And I couldn't handle the rush of leaving on a Friday, going up to these various places. The bus would meet me and then come back, and I arrived to class and teach this 8 o'clock class. That's what got it. It was so much, it had grown so. And I said, well, I can't continue to move at that rate.
It was during this time that Henry began a relationship with a young woman he had known for many years.
He used to walk me home from school when I was in the 7th grade.
Walking home each day, unbeknownst to me, I was walking with a girlfriend I had at that time. This young girl would follow behind us when we walked.
I would sit and fantasize about this relationship that he and I had.
She was walking behind me and always saying, "That's Henry Porter. I like it."
Actually, it was that he was going the same way because my house was along the way to his house. But it always made me feel real good to say that I was walked home by the president of the student body at Booker High School when he was a senior and I was 12 years old.
I had no idea.
The young couple's paths crossed many times throughout those early years. When Henry was at Yale, Cynthia was studying theater at Carnegie Mellon in Pennsylvania. She would often visit Henry at Yale. They began a relationship that grew over the next few years.
And then after I was teaching at the university, I purchased this ring, and I must have had the ring about 6, 7, 8, 9 months. And I was waiting on, do I want to do this? You know how you get. You just still get cold feet. And so one day, she was up there, and I was looking at it, right? And I had the box, and I was looking. And she turned, and she looked, and she said, "Oh, what?" And I said, "Oh, she must have seen it." So I turned, and I said, "Will you marry me?"
We were actually engaged 7 years.
The young couple were married on October 23, 1976 in Sarasota at the Church of the Palms Presbyterian Church. Henry was keenly aware that his marriage would be held up as an example to others in the community. It was a challenge he embraced.
I wanted to make sure that the people who were watching would understand how to hold it and help their children, and the family could work harmoniously together. I wanted that.
They soon began their family, with Henry II being born in 1977, Etienne in 1979, Zadok in 1984, and Zakur in 1987. I got joy! With Cynthia working beside him at every level, the ministry continued to grow. The meetings were changing the lives of young people within the community. The chorus continued performing throughout the world, making several trips to Africa.
If we will pray, ikiwa sisi tutaomba, in Jesus' name, katika jina la Yesu, we can ask the Father, tunaweza kumuuliza Baba for anything, kwa lolote. If two will come together,
He met and prayed with leaders of various African nations. However, it was the impact he had on the people that most touched him.
One girl said something to me that I loved, but also that struck me, because she told me this. She said, after hearing you talk tonight, I feel I can be somebody, because I was thinking that I, being a black African woman, I could never be anything in this world. But when you talk to me today, I feel like I can. And those things stick with me, because I want to give people hope.
In 1980, Westcoast purchased the former Assembly of God building on US 301 in Sarasota. From here, Henry would build a ministry which would change the lives of many.
I think he was among the first, if not the first, to really choose to specialize in young people. And all of those young people were not ones who had everything together. Many of them were people who had experienced problems with society, who had experienced problems with not being able to, quote unquote, find themselves.
In 1981, Henry found a need to begin a school which would nurture the talents of its students.
My little boy was 2, and Cynthia, my wife, came to me one day and she said, she's a little under 2. She said, he can read. I said, Cynthia, he's my son too. What I meant by that is, you don't try to convince me a little baby this size is reading. I know we're all happy about our child. Cynthia, you know. And she said, no, I'm not kidding, this is real, you ought to listen. So he got there and he took his little cards and she put the cards in front of him. He would call out the words and call out another words. I put them in a different order. He'd do the same thing. I looked at that and I said, how can I keep that? How can I hold it? I said, then if I'm going to train him, I'll need to train his peers. Because if I leave them unattended, he won't stay as he is. So I started the school to train those around him. And thereby including them, I was helping him.
C-I, say C-side, C-O, so, say C-side, so, C-U, so, say C-side, so, so, R-D.
Well, the school is very much a part of the church. I account them one and the same. Definitely to be able to capture young minds and raise them to be broader in their scope of understanding of what the real world is about, not only as it relates to academics, but as it relates to the arts, and as it relates to all other genres in the field of endeavors that they've been able to explore through just being in that church.
Many of them went away and earned their bachelors and their masters and their doctors, and then returned back. They returned to the center and begun to work in the center.
I've met very few African Americans in this community that has not been affected by this man.
The educational opportunities that the young people for Westcoast Center for Human Development, they have gotten involved in community activities. They have worked very hard in North Sarasota and in Sarasota as a whole. The children, or students, I shouldn't call them children because they go from kindergarten through 12th grade, learn respect for elders and for their peers. And they bring that attitude of caring and love to the community.
A lot of the progressive African Americans in town, when you look back through their history, you'll find it stemmed from the Westcoast Center for Human Development.
Many of them are participating in governmental activities and as members of advisory boards and of boards within the city. Their impact and outreach, when I know that a student has come from the Westcoast Center for Human Development, I know that this is a treasure.
He became a part of this community in its machinery, its mechanics, with the education. No one else would have had the boldness of this young man to step off, set up a school, and then turn out individuals. Who would have ever thought the young man from Sarasota, Newtown, could travel to Africa and come back, not one time, but many times? Oh, he has been a true influence on this community from every point of view that I can think of.
In 1983, Henry was ordained as a bishop of his church. In 1986, the United Bible College in Orlando, Florida, bestowed upon him the Doctorate of Letters in Education. In 1989, Trinity College awarded him the Doctor of Divinity degree. The ministry founded by Dr. Henry Porter continues to grow, with plans to build a new center and school in the near future. He continues to teach, preach, write music, and sing. Throughout the world, he is known as an ambassador of love. Small wonder, as Dr. Henry Porter founded his ministry on Christ's doctrine of love. In that manner, he has focused his energies and talents on helping others become the best they can be.
You're no less than the sun, the moon, and the stars. You were created just like they were. And you've got to be your best.
Come on, put your hands together with me. I thank Jesus for all he's done for me.
Dr. Henry L. Porter is known as a man with a vision, an agent of success, an engineer of progress, and a master of perception. We ask this effervescent servant of God his advice for those who follow.
You follow your heart. You do the thing that you know is right for you. You may not know what that is until you actually connect with other people, to see and to hear them, because sometimes in the expression of others, we find ourselves.
I gotta let everybody know, Jesus is mine. Ikiwa wili watakuja pamoja. Together like me and you.
If two, ikiwa wawili, will come together, watakuja pamoja. Will he do it? Je, atatenda? If two, ikiwa wawili, will come together, watakuja pamoja.
If two will come